Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
Well, I'm sorry you had to leave your higher-paying job at Chick-fil-A, Gavin, but you signed a contract that said you could be called back at any time. Ass.
The following podcast contains...
But swearing and using dirty words is not one of my vices. I don't use foul language, and I don't like to hear anyone else use it either.
explicit language.
Hello and welcome to the podcast that asks a simple question. When you went hunting for communists in your local Boy Scout troop, what the hell were you thinking? I'm your host, Dave Bledsoe, and this is episode number 516, Red Whine edition of the show, where we talk about the various red scares in America and how they never really went away. We kick off our pivot to boomers right now, so stay tuned. What the Hell Are You Thinking podcast is brought to you by your local Communist Party. We want you to know that we can't even agree on a place to meet, much less take over your town. When it comes to boogeymen, we communists have long filled the role for America, and honestly, we're not sure why. As groups go, we are mostly 5 or 6 20-something baristas and bartenders with college degrees not suitable for jobs pretty much anywhere. 16th century Indonesian poetry majors aren't really in high demand in today's job market. I mean, communism isn't even practiced in so-called communist countries anymore. So you got nothing to fear from us, your local Communist Party. If we're charging for our newsletter, honestly, how commie can we be?
In 1950, men throughout the world learned to look on the brutal face of communism. Berlin, powder keg of Europe, saw a mass demonstration of indoctrinated young Germans on May Day. France was also beset by communist-inspired strife. Red Union members adopted violent methods to prevent the unloading of Marshall Plan aid. And across the world in Japan, America's stronghold in the Pacific, the busy commies were at it again. Students went on a rampage in Tokyo with something less than successful results when opposed by Japanese police aided by occupation military police. But far more sinister to Americans was home front communism. Union Square in New York was the backdrop for these scenes of red violence. From their ranks will come the saboteurs, spies, and subversives should World War III be forced upon America. Underlining the menace from within was Valentin Gubichev, who received secret documents from Judith Kaplan, government employee. This Soviet functionary in the United Nations was deported following his conviction.
I have been accused of being a communist from time to time.
Because you are.
No, really, I'm not. Frankly, I like having money far too much for me to ever truly be a communist.
You traitorous rat bastard.
I was never a communist. I wouldn't even know where to sign up to become a communist. I assume there's some sort of sheet that goes around that you need to put your contact information on or something, and honestly, I just never saw one. At best, I could be said to hold, I don't know, socialist beliefs?
Is there a difference?
Based on what I saw growing up, mostly involved communists wearing fur hats and socialists wearing berets.
I'm pretty sure you're wrong about that.
When I was young, I was, of course, neither. I was, in fact, a Republican.
You sick fuck.
Back in the 80s, everyone I knew was Republican. Hell, even the Democrats were Republican back then. And if there's one thing Republicans are very, very much against, it's,
black people.
No, well, yeah, but no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying that Republicans were against communism or socialism. Pretty much any of the isms you can think of, the GOP was a firm no on the issue. But by the time I was old enough to examine the issues rationally, it was rapidly becoming a non-issue. The Soviets were tottering, the Chinese were inviting Western business to build factories, and the Vietnamese were raking in money hand over fist from Hollywood movie studios, providing locations for war movies, and only the Cubans were still legit commies, and they weren't really much of a threat outside of a couple of neighborhoods in Miami.
A1A, Beachfront Avenue.
By the 90s, the commies were no longer a threat and were rapidly being replaced with Muslim extremism as the enemy du jour in most of the world. But for half a century, the communists had a great fucking run. Everyone in the West was looking for commies everywhere. The government, the military, Hollywood studios, universities, small-town Rotary clubs, the back room of Phil's barbershops. They were checking under their bed every night just to make sure there wasn't a communist there.
You never know.
Never know.
And you cannot understand the baby boomers' world without understanding this one simple fact. So let's talk about Red Scares and their impacts on the United States of America in the 50s and 60s. But first...
Are we still doing this?
Oh, yeah. We're still doing it. We got to talk about the father of communism. The man who scared the rich and powerful for 2 centuries. The German with the impressive beard. Karl Heinrich Marx. Born in the Kingdom of Prussia in 1818, his father was a lawyer and his mother was professionally pregnant. Karl was the oldest of 9 children, and the family was of Jewish descent, which has caused no end of problems for the Jews, but they were not actually Jewish. He and his family were actually evangelical Christians, but back in those days, I don't think that means what it means today.
Have you heard the good news about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ?
Never fear, he still got all the persecution that came from being Jewish, but none of the benefits of the faith, meaning, of course, 8 presents at Hanukkah and cool yarmulkes. Not that Karl was all that religious, he was very much an Enlightenment man, meaning God was dead and rational thought had killed him. Karl entered the University of Bonn in 1830, where he participated in traditional student activities like, I'm going to quote now from Britannica.com, quote, fought a duel, spent a day in jail for being drunk and disorderly. He presided at the Tavern Club, which was at odds with the more aristocratic students' associations, and joined a poets' club that included some political activists, unquote. When not busy day drinking and brawling, Marx found the time to attend classes where he was introduced to the works of a German philosopher by the name of Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose thinking focused on the progress of history. I'm going to try and make this long story super duper short. It was like, I took a full semester on Hegel and his philosophy in college. I got an A- in the class, and I still can't tell you exactly what the fuck Hegel was on about.
Money well spent.
But Karl Marx could. In fact, Hegel influenced him so much that years later, when he and his hetero-life mate Friedrich Engels wrote out the Communist Manifesto, it was deeply infused with Hegelian thought. Marx and Engels and diverse other bearded European thinkers had been watching the world change. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, colonialism was at its peak, Europe was being rocked by a series of revolutions, inspired in no small part by the independence of the United States and our subsequent Constitution, and they began to draw some conclusions. First of all,
the rich get richer.
And the poor...
Nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
And maybe someone should do something about that. Being first and foremost philosophers and poets, they immediately thought...
A manifesto. A poem.
And the product of that thinking was the aforementioned 18-page Communist Manifesto. The manifesto states, as it is summed up on its Wikipedia page, that, quote, capitalism does not offer humanity the possibility of self-realization. Instead, ensuring that human beings are perpetually stunted and alienated, it theorizes that capitalism will bring about its own destruction by polarizing and unifying the proletariat, and predicts that a revolution will lead to an emergence of communism as a classless society in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all.
Which they're not wrong about.
It concludes with one hell of a call to action. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, which I gotta say is some damn good oratory. The manifesto languished in academia for a couple of decades and then caught fire in the labor struggles of the late 19th century when the hypothetical manifesto became concrete as millions of workers fought for just a little piece of the pie. Marx intended on his words to shake up society, but the impact of his words on the world and history was probably not exactly what he intended. A century of bloodshed, oppression, looming Armageddon, and a whole bunch of Hollywood writers being forced to write television shows under pseudonyms for a couple of decades.
The horror.
The reality of communism is a topic for another podcast, one whose host understands Hegelian philosophy for starters, so I'm not going to spend any further time talking about it. We are here to talk about the fear of communism in the United States and its impact on history and culture, and to tell dick jokes. While the focus of this episode is the Red Scare and how that shaped Boomerland, it must be noted this was the second Red Scare that did the boomers. Long before Tail Gunner Joe took his first drink, the United States was hunting commies in the woodpile. Marxist socialism was well established in the country as the first golden age of capitalism reached its zenith in the late 19th century. The inevitable backlash against the unfettered greed and astronomical imbalance of wealth pushed American labor further and further left to the point where the average union man would not think of himself as a socialist, but agreed with pretty much everything that socialism stood for. And after the obligatory burst of patriotism from World War I ended with the war, the situation at home with labor was boiling as thousands upon thousands of veterans returned from Europe to pick up their old jobs only to be told those jobs didn't come with their old wages. Together with strict price and wage controls from the war, the corporate masters were resisting the workers and their unions with everything they could muster. And then that's when the strike started.
Strike! 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 Strike!
Started almost as soon as the guns stopped in World War I, a wave of uprising, strikes, and general discord kicked off around the world, inspired by the Russian Revolution, though the problems that instigated the unrest in each country were acutely local. In the United States, the first big labor reaction was a massive strike in Seattle, when 35,000 shipyard workers went on strike and were soon joined by other unions in the city, and before long, 60,000 workers in Seattle alone were involved, and Seattle was stopped dead in its tracks. And this caused a bit of consternation in the powers that be.
That's a bit of an understatement, don't you think?
It freaked the capitalists the fuck out because general strikes were not and are not a thing in America. If they were, we might have something like a fair system. Massive police and federal troops were brought in to break the strike, so many and so much that labor leaders called it off before those troops were used. But it was enough to get congressional committees formed, all in the name of rooting out Bolshevism in America. You should understand that this wasn't about labor. I mean, yes, it was. But underneath it all was your bog standard white American fear and loathing of immigrants.
Of course it was.
With the end of the First World War, massive waves of immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe began to pour into the country. Low-wage laborers crossed picket lines, and the rich viewed anyone with a Berg or a Steen in their name as a Marxist. Not helping were the actual anarchist and Marxist agitators, most of whom were actually born in America and not Jewish. A series of bombings rocked the country, attributed to anarchists, though that was never proven in court, and the whole thing boiled over in a series of May Day riots in eastern industrial cities where counter-demonstrators attacked marchers, and pretty soon,
this business will get out of control. It'll get out of control, and we'll be lucky to live through it.
Most of 1919 was consumed by labor riots, unspeakable atrocities committed in race riots. Important thing to know about race riots, it wasn't the black people that started the race riots. It was the white people. Not to mention a series of investigations going all the way from local to federal. And a result of those investigations were a wave of draconian laws. Suspected agitators were rounded up and deported. And activists, including Eugene Debs, the great American socialist, were in prison. Things were finally settled down in 1920, though sporadic flare-ups continued well into the early days of World War II. To be clear, bad shit did happen, but the idea that Marxism was sweeping the country was an invention of the press, and the press was owned and a mouthpiece of the capitalist money class, so they were not in the least objectively reporting for the truth. So shit got real bad, then the Depression happened, shit got worse, thank God for Hitler in Japan. Of course, for the few years we pretended to be cool with communists, but just as soon as our mutual interests were over, both sides went right back to hating one another. In a sequel to the year following World War I, all the labor unrest bottled up during World War II popped its cork and spewed all over America in 45 and 46 in a series of massive labor strikes that rippled through the country. Hollywood led it off with 10,000 film workers. This was followed by oil workers, auto workers, electric workers, steel workers, meat packers, coal and other miners, and railroad engineers.
Pretty much everyone.
Well, not everyone. I mean, the shitter cleaners stayed on the job.
Patriot. American patriot.
In 1947, the response of the money class was to spin the wheels of propaganda and get a moral panic train moving on the media. First target, Hollywood.
And lots of Jews.
Yeah. The House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, which was the first impaneled in 1938 and not dissolved until 1975, I discovered. And their charge was to investigate, un-American activities. What exactly constituted an un-American activity? Was it not wearing a little American flag lapel pin or failing to hold your hand over your heart while reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? Yes, actually. Oh, and definitely.
Do you hate hot dogs?
But mostly it was being, knowing, sharing snacks with, or breathing the same air as a
known communist.
Hollywood was a big problem for the capitalist masters. It was economically lucrative, but again, filled with, Jews! Jews! Many of whom had been involved in various social causes like civil rights, safe working conditions, fair wage, and frankly, that just reeked of communism. So HUAC began holding hearings trying to sniff out communists in Hollywood. They did this by finding snitches willing to sell out their fellow actors and union sisters and brothers under oath in front of a committee. These narc bitches included the president of the Screen Actors Guild, who didn't name names, I want to be clear, but gravely said that a lot of people in Hollywood were in fact Jews. I mean commies. And who was this narc bitch? Well, none other than our old friend, Ronald Wilson Reagan.
He said it.
Oh, you thought we were done talking about him just because we're not talking about the 80s anymore? Well, you were wrong. The Hollywood blacklist, those actors, writers, directors, musicians that refused to name names in HUAC hearings, were subsequently deemed unhireable by Hollywood in a series of episodes. This is a series of episodes in its own right, but all you need to know for this week is it achieved the intended effect of scaring people of Hollywood into compliance. Their compliance was needed because Hollywood had the same kind of influence shitty internet influencers do today. They told people what to think, so controlling them was essential to controlling America. The HUAC hearings were never about finding communists. There had been a good number of communists in Hollywood prior to and during World War II. I mean, not communists in the fur-hatted collective farm kind of communists, but the kind of commies that told you they were communists at a party hoping to get laid. Hollywood communism was never the hardcore revolutionary seize the means of production and murder the bourgeois style that ran through Europe and to a lesser extent American labor. Hollywood communism was more like the key parties of the 1970s, a naughty thing you try once or twice to spice things up, but there was no fucking way you were going to give up being rich and famous to work in a tractor factory outside of Tulsa. Because when they heard the slogan, each according to his ability, each according to his needs, their ability was, of course, much, much higher because they worked in Hollywood, not a tractor factory outside of Tulsa, so their needs were much, much higher. HUAC, while pernicious, was basically a pop gun compared to the atomic bomb that was Wisconsin Junior Senator Joseph McCarthy. To understand what kind of man Joe was, allow me to explain his nickname, Tail Gunner Joe.
Sounds impressive.
Yeah, it wasn't. McCarthy served as an intelligence officer in the Marine Dive Bomber Squadron in the Pacific during World War II. Not the kind of intelligence officer who snuck around behind enemy lines or flew missions over pending targets to gauge the extent of their defensive. Oh, no. Tail Gunner Joe wrote up missions from those guys and then told the pilots who would be doing the fighting and dying what to expect. But still,
thank you for your service.
Towards the end of the war, Joe was finally given the chance he wanted to fly genuine combat missions. And he did, over areas already heavily bombed by previous missions to gauge the damage done during those missions. But he was allowed to play with the guns on the planes, and during one such mission, a perfectly safe mission, he was allowed to shoot as many rounds as he wanted from the aircraft's machine guns, which he did, mostly at palm trees.
Fucking hero, huh?
Earning him the mocking nickname from his peers. Joe didn't so much have friends of Tail Gunner Joe. Also, he lied about his accomplishments in the service to anyone who would listen, going so far as forging a letter from Admiral Nimitz commending his service. Joe returned from the war and ran for Senate in 1946. Originally, he was a Democrat, but he switched party to Republicans to better reflect a party he felt he had a better chance of winning in. His early years in the Senate can be described as
by lackluster teammates who refused to carry their own weight.
So he landed such plum assignments as delivering a speech to the Women's Republican Club of Wheeling, West Virginia. In February of 1950, in front of that august body, Tail Gunner Joe told the Republican ladies of Wheeling that, quote, "The reason why we find ourselves in a position of impotency is not because our only powerful potential enemy has sent men to invade our shores, but rather because the traitorous actions of those who have been treated so well by this nation. It has not been the less fortunate or members of minority groups who have been the traitors to this nation, but rather those who have had all the benefits of the wealthiest nation on earth had to offer. The finest homes, the finest college education, and the finest jobs in government we can give. This glaringly true in the State Department. They're the bright young men who are born with silver spoons in their mouths are the one who have been the most traitorous. I have here in my hand a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party who are nevertheless still working and shaping policy in the State Department," unquote.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, 205 known communists in the State Department would be a lot, though that number would subsequently be lowered to 73 or 77 or 75. There was never really any explanation of how many names Joe had on his list and how he got the list or who that list encompassed or the proof of that anyone on that list was actually who he said that they were. Do you know how many names Tail Gunner Joe actually had of so-called known communists working in the State Department?
0. Nada. Zip.
McCarthy did not start the Red Scare. It'd been going on since 47, but McCarthy brought it home to the average American because McCarthy was a raging drunk, which I got to respect that. But more than that, when he got good and loaded, he knew how to fucking demagogue for the camera. He understood that Americans love drama. He didn't really care if the drama was based in reality. He understood how to use the media to push a narrative instinctively. He was not telegenic or particularly eloquent. He was a snarling, vicious cunt who attacked anyone who questioned him. He attacked their loyalty, intellect, and their mothers. He threatened those who would not kowtow to his abuse, and that he lacked the power to back up his threats did not stop him from the threats, and eventually the government just up and gave him the power to back up his threats. McCarthy was a lit match that was dropped into a pool of gasoline that would burn through America in just a few very, very short years. And I want to be clear, it was the Truman administration that spilled the gas in the first place. In 47, he signed an Executive Order 9835 establishing the Federal Employees Loyalty Program. Sure, it's a good thing for federal employees to be loyal to the government. It was just a little thin on exactly what disloyalty looked like. The FBI was empowered to investigate potential disloyalty, resorting in, according to Wikipedia, quote, between 1948 and 1958, the FBI ran initial reviews of 4.5 million government employees on an annual basis and another 500,000 applicants for government positions. It conducted 2,700 field investigations. Besides those officially terminated as the result of investigations, around 5,000 federal employees offered voluntary resignations in the light of those investigations. Most of the resignations took place at hearings conducted by congressional committees, according to one historian. By mid-1952, when more than 4 million people, actual or prospective employees, had gone through the checkboards, they had dismissed or denied the employees' employment to 378, and none of the discharge cases led to a discovery of espionage, unquote. After the truth of Stalin's brutality became common knowledge, members in the Communist Party all but disappeared. By the time of the Red Scare, at the highest, no more than 50,000 people out of a population of 150 million were in any way communist. And as we said earlier, being a communist meant different things to different people. But none of this mattered to those beating the bushes for communist infiltrators. The investigations were deeply intrusive. The Gilder Lehrman Institute for History describes just some of the tactics that were used. Quote, Government loyalty boards investigated millions of federal employees, asking what books and magazines they read, what unions and civic organizations they belonged to, and whether or not they went to church. Hundreds of screenwriters, actors, and directors were blacklisted because of alleged political beliefs, while teachers, steelworkers, sailors, lawyers, and social workers lost their jobs for similar reasons. More than 39 states required teachers and other public employees to take loyalty oaths. Meanwhile, some libraries pulled books that were considered too leftist from their shelves. The banned volumes included classics such as Robin Hood, Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, and John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, unquote. And who these investigations targeted, be they by FBI, HUAC, or McCarthy, that was what truly told the tale of the Red Scare. Actors, academics, poets, labor organizers, civil rights leaders, union leaders, long-term government employees, professors, musicians, teachers, writers, and anyone who just
seems a little gay.
The so-called Lavender Scare ended the careers of anyone in government who was or was just perceived as gay. It sparked a massive public pushback against perversion and inserted the idea that homosexuals were child predators into the public consciousness. None of it was based on reality, but that never stopped a conservative from using lies and propaganda to make their point. By the time the second Red Scare was winding down, the damage was done. The unions had lost power, Hollywood was towing the line, and the deep state was thinned out, and the gays were outed and fired. It was a massive success for the right wing that would have gone on a lot longer had McCarthy not started claiming the military was also infested with communist gays, which posed a threat to the nascent military-industrial complex, and he was finally shut down and disgraced.
Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Tail Gunner Joe would be dead at 57 by liver failure brought on by his astounding alcoholism. I mean, I drink a little, folks, but McCarthy was a fucking drunk. You know something funny, pot friends? The people who were freaking out over the communist infiltrators were right. The Soviets were deep inside the government, and they had been for decades.
Well, that can't be good.
The Soviet intelligence service, the NKVD, and the later KGB had moles and spies buried deep in Western governments and businesses. They were getting information from the Manhattan Project almost as fast as the Pentagon. Secrets leaked out of the U.S. military and intelligence agency like a saggy diaper. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg really were spying for the Soviets all along, and there were many, many more. This was part of a larger movement to spread communism to every nation on earth in the world. From the Comintern to the Iron Curtain to Cuba, Africa, and Asia, the Soviet Union and China very much did everything in their power to expand international communism and displace and replace capitalist governments of the West with communism.
True, it's all true.
The underlying fear of the most rabid anti-communists rested on solid bedrock that the communists were actively working to take over the world. And even more, the Red Scare and the investigations did dismantle communist networks in the States. Their networks were exposed. People were prosecuted or traded to the Soviets for our captured spies, and because of the Red Scare, the Soviet Union stopped using groups of spies to gather information. Not that these spies were ever Hollywood actors or union organizers in Topeka. They were just some bland-ass guys sitting at a desk, a scientist working quietly, stealing information and passing it along to the KGB handlers. Not for love of communism, but for cold, hard American cash. Lone wolves doing it for their money were the main method for the rest of the Cold War. Communists used capitalism against itself, and it is a wonder they didn't win. The Red Scare would shape the society of the United States until well into the 1990s, when the Soviet Union finally collapsed. While the fervor of the initial witch hunts faded, the latent suspicions of the out groups continued to be associated with communism. the official reason you could not be gay in the military until Don't Ask, Don't Tell was revealed is because spies could blackmail you to give secrets by revealing that you were gay, which is some real circle jerk reasoning if ever you heard some. You couldn't be gay because we say you can't be gay, because if you're gay, the communists would use it against you because we say you can't be gay. Conservative politicians have always had the crutch of beating communism to hobble around on, and defending from communism propped up the money-making apparatus that is the military-industrial complex. So long as there were commies, people could stay in power, fortunes could be made, and brown people could be bombed. It was a win-win for everyone, the communists, the capitalists, the brown people, not so much. But most importantly, for our purposes, it is the first leg of a tripod that created the baby boomer culture, along with the atomic age and the space race. I just tell you that so you know what topics are coming up in the next two shows. Spoiler alert. That is it for the show. I know I said the show was on hiatus till March and maybe forever. Turns out I was just sick and depressed because I hate the fucking holidays. So we're back early and we have begun our pivot to boomers. The show will be moving to an every 2-week release schedule because while I was sick and sad, the part about writing new stuff every week was true. It's a real bitch. So you know what? Be happy we came back at all. Speaking of happiness, rate and review us wherever you get your pods so others can find us. Take a listen and wonder if you're taking some kind of happy pill when you suggested us to them. Kick us $1 at patreon.com/whatthehellpodcast. We need that money to pay for Gavin's non-refundable plane tickets home when he thought the show was going on hiatus. Do all the things Jeremy tells you to do in the closing credits. Otherwise, well, he's just not going to provide snacks during next Communist Cell meeting. And so for me, Dave, workers of the world unite, Bledsoe, producer.
No, Prime Minister Thatcher would not approve of my faith.
Gavin, and all the fictional commentary on the show. We want to say that you don't really lose your chains when you move to communism. You just trade out who's holding the other end of them. And we'll see you all next episode.
What the Hell Were You Thinking stars Dave Bledsoe and features Gavin St. James and several fictional minions. The show is produced by Kimberly Steele and a part of the Seltzer Kings podcast network. You can find more information on the show on their website, whatthehellpodcast.com, or on Facebook as What the Hell Podcast. Thanks for listening.
I have no ending for this, so I take a small bow.
We're talking about the atomic bomb here.
Seltzer Kings
Podcasts.